Welcome back. You're watching Sokoni. One man, one vote, 1 shilling, one problem. And you can see the man there trying to have that tightrope circling right now of a shilling. If you can look at the little cartoon there, trying to juggle that shilling there. If we just drop the tag so that we can see it fully. Right, there you are. It's quite an act.
Quite a balancing act.
So the shilling and the ballot box, you have to put them together. This can be a very cutting issues when it comes to 2027. You have the ballot box on your head and the shilling there. It's beginning to be a tightrope cyclist, as you can see.
Interesting that he should be the poster boy for this issue. And given the path he has followed, in which I think he did ban some of his bridges, and he needs now to get back to it. And they say, we Catholics say, mea culpa, mea culpa. Forgive me, forgive me. I do not know.
Just continue.
Yeah, whether he in fact will be a convincing spokesperson for the issues he's raising, which are issues that will be raised over and over. Each time they are shelved and then they are raised when the time is right. Yeah.
Right. And then we have another little cartoon there that we showed you last time, that the tropical storm, Lali. Let us just move on with the program right now. I want us just to delve deeper on this. I think I'll begin with you, Bill Okero, especially on the drama right now that we're facing. And this is what Omtatah is moving back to court, challenging the finance bill. And it says the National Assembly has prioritized the Finance Bill 2024 before considering and approving the Appropriations Act 2024. It seems there's a process propriety that was not really followed here. And I think also this before was an issue that was raised. Still they are on it again. What does this portend?
No, the process, the budget process is very clearly laid out in the Constitution and in the Public Finance Management Act. And it's not the first time. What happens is that I think even last year we had an issue of Parliament, of Treasury, not following due process in terms of the way they get those documents published. And so I think the issue is, if you want to raise money, there has to be a budget. So there has to be a budget process, there's a budget approved, then based on this budget, you come up with measures to raise revenue to meet those budget requirements. That's why the budget comes first. But there's a sense, the way I see it is that we've been taken for granted in this country. The executive feels that Parliament is an appendage of the executive. They'll do whatever they want. So it doesn't really matter whether you put the cart before the horse or not. It will still be, the end result would be the same. Both of them will be approved, so they don't seem to care. But I think in a country where there has to be, the rule of law, I think it's important, nonetheless, whether you have everyone in your pocket or not, there has to be fidelity to the law. And that's why I think this young man from Busia donated to us generously by these people. We should pray for him. We should continue fighting this. But ideally, this should have been Parliament. We should have said, no, sorry, you can't discuss. But this is Parliament that has run away with it. Finance bill, before they've discussed the budget. So this is unfortunately what happens when you have lost direction. And this is what Parliament seems to be in now. They've lost direction.
But why is Parliament, blatantly, knowing the due process, doing this, right? And Omtatah always is being told, oh, you're doing the Lord's work. So they give Omtatah a chance to do the Lord's work all the time, and we know they have to follow the due process.
I think it's unfortunate that this is, I don't know, it cannot be, could have slipped everybody's attention. There are very many very
slipped?
Well-resourced people. So it's not slipped. We have to assume it's willful. And if it's willful, the question is, what purpose does it serve? It doesn't seem to serve any. If anything, it preempts a useful discussion of the real issues that are going to come out with the finance bill. Because it's not the finance bill yet, as Bill has explained very clearly.
Yeah.
finance bill is looking for ways and means of raising revenue to finance something. What is that something that you have not yet appropriated? So I hope that it will be solved quickly. In fact, it's a waste of time for it to play out in court. I hope that the Speaker can quickly rectify this problem. I think he should. It is now down his ally. And the phone calls between the Speaker and the Treasury and should really fix this. I do not think it should engage the nation. We should be now more usefully concerned about the content and the impacts, the kinds of things we have been raising here of the finance bill. Because there are always two sides to the finance bill. There's what government says it will do and why they think that's the best package they can put together. And then the other side is the consumers and others who say, hey, first it won't meet that, and two, it is hurting us more than it's gaining anything for anybody. So we should focus there. And from a policy perspective, all those arguments are valid. So we should focus there, and rather than waste time on the process issues. But we have to deal with the process issues now that are before us.
All right, another process issue, Bill Okero, is the fact that when there is a complementary disregard, because I think the issue has been, this matter also has to be thrashed out by the Senate. It's not just a preserve of the National Assembly. And this has been an issue before. We moved to court on the same thing. So are we just going back to sound like a broken record on the issue that we've been to the courts and we're still doing the same? I don't know.
Yeah, when there are no consequences to breach of regulations of law, whatever, then we'll repeat it every time. We'll repeat it because, nothing happens to you. 1 year down the road, the next year somebody else will repeat it again and nothing happens to the person. So that's where the problem is. I think we need, as a government, to have consequences for people who fail to do the work the way it's required to be done. So if, for example, this thing happened, somewhere in Treasury, those who are, or in Parliament, someone should take responsibility and somebody should be dealt with. Why did you, push this instead of doing this? And this is what the law says. So if that doesn't happen, then people do what they want. And this is why we find these things are being repeated. But it also tells you that these are issues of governance, let me tell you. These are all issues about governance. It's about leadership. So when people don't play second fiddle to the Constitution and all these things, this is the end result.
All right. Debal, before I delve into my opinion on the finance bill, let me first talk about the macros. Like I said to you at the beginning, we've just come back from an extensive roadshow in the United Kingdom. And really credit must go to the government for the way the macros are panning out, and especially the opinion that it is forming in the eyes of global investors. The things that global investors look at are, the macroeconomic indicators like inflation, the GDP growth, which is at a healthy 5.6%, the very commendable job that the central bank has done to access dollars and stabilize the shilling. Right now, we haven't seen any problem, by the investors being able to access dollars when they're repatriating their profits. And the central bank has done a really commendable job in that. And we are now seeing a larger influx of FDI coming into the country. However, when we look at the finance bill, I think we have to be completely brutally honest with ourselves that this regime inherited a significant debt liability carried forward from previous regimes. And hence, the only cure for debt is payment. It is not the cure. You either have to renegotiate, but even renegotiating comes with a reality that at the end of the day, you must pay your debts. So, we look at the issues, specific issues that have been raised by the suit that has been filed by Omtatah. It's very interesting that he actually focuses on revenue, on the fidelity of revenue collection and appropriation. And he deals with the fact that there is that possibility that there are unbudgeted revenues and also unbudgeted expenditure. And I think we saw that especially when the previous regime was handing over to the current regime, that there was a whole host of, in the Auditor General's report, a whole host of unbudgeted expenditure that was highlighted. And I think that is of great concern, especially to us as taxpayers. The thing, however, I would like to say is that As a capital market, what the tax that impacts us on us most is the fact that they are proposing to charge a 5% tax on infrastructure bonds, and we support the fact that it may be necessary for the raising of funds for government to meet its development and agenda and debt obligations. We also look at it as it may have the potential of discouraging banks from investing more in these instruments and release therefore money to the private sector and encourage private sector growth. So we support that initiative from that perspective. However, I think there is a need for government to temper some of the propositions that are in the tax bill, because the reality on the ground is that the average Kenyan is facing very significant challenges in their day-to-day livelihoods. And I think even for the running of small and medium-sized enterprises now, it has become a very tall order in this country, and we must make sure that more jobs are not lost and that people do not get into a situation where they're unable to meet their tax obligations. One of the things that I saw in the economic survey, and I'm glad that CAM is on the table, is that despite the fact that there is factory closures, the economic survey says that the manufacturing sector increased employment by 2.7%. So that is my contribution on the finance bill.
Yeah, adding the 2% to GDP. Before we come to you, Anthony, I just want us to also hear from the President on the sentiments regarding taxes, and then we'll delve deeper into it.
Payslip here. Payslip yenu iko na mlolongo ya taxes ama hakuna? Na ni fupi ama ni mrefu? Alafu si mlolongo ya taxes ni mrefu hapa. That is how you build a country, my friends. You don't build a country because of debts. Ati kukopa hapa na kukopa pale. You build your country using your own taxes. So munite zakayo, munite nini, lakini tulipe tax tujenge Kenya. Mnafikiri ati Kenya itajengwa na wa Chinese ama itajengwa na wa Marekani? Sisi ndio tutajenga. Tuko pamoja. So tafadhali mwambieni wale ndugu zetu wako nyumbani, mwambie hapa mnalipa tax. Na mnalipa tax kwa nchi ambayo si yenu.
All right. And it seems, italipo na wa China, looking at the Business Daily, France topples China on loans as Ruto looks west. Just to juxtapose what the President is saying below, before you come to Anthony, what will be your sentiment? France topples China on loans as Ruto looks west. He says we have to pay our taxes, we will not build a country with loans, but it seems we're still on a borrowing spree.
No, we're borrowing. Yeah, that actually is one of the serious concerns I have with this administration. They have given two reasons why they have come up with all these tax measures. One, they said, is because we want to pay our loans and we don't want to borrow. But the reality is we are borrowing much more than even the former administration. If you look at the budget policy statements, it says by 2027, the target is we'll borrow 5 trillion. This is official budget policy statement by the government. 5 trillion. Uhuru borrowed 6 trillion in 10 years. The target here is to do 5 trillion. And 5 trillion is if we meet the tax targets. If KRA fails to meet the tax target, the figure will go up. So it belies the argument that, look, we don't want to borrow. And so you're borrowing at the same time, you're taking taxes. And the second thing which bothers me is that with all that, the borrowing and the tax increases, the service delivery is getting worse. Universities are shutting down, there's no money. Vaccines are not available, people are suffering in hospitals. I mean, there's serious problems in government. People are not getting paid on time. So you wonder then what's happening? You're borrowing, you're taxing people. Forget about development. Development is the lowest rate now since I think in the last probably decade or so, or 2 decades. And they'll tell you that it's not about absorption rate, but there is no exchequer for projects. And last week you saw the headline. Majority of the projects that have been launched in the last 2 years by this administration, it was in the Standard, have stalled. You launch them with fanfare and so forth, and there's no money. Mm-hmm. So nothing goes on. So I think really it's unfortunate, but I think there's no consistency on policy. We don't see what exactly is the strategic direction really of the government. So you're hurting your people, but at the same time you are not making the situation better in the long term by borrowing more, whether it's from east or west. It really doesn't matter, and it's better. Let me tell you, ordinary Kenyans will tell you it's better to borrow from China than the West, because at least from China they don't have those painful conditions. Here, every single amendment in these finance bills, we are told, is some little boy from America who sits in IMF will tell Treasury, where are you? That's how we should recover the taxes, because IMF is about paying taxes.
What's the deal with France? Because I can see everyone is chasing France out of town.
France.
This headline may be misleading. There's no way France, Germany, all of Europe put together would compete with China in terms of the resource envelope now. China versus US, yes. China versus the whole of Europe, as it were. France, this is just a little spike here and there. So it's not anywhere near in that league, as it were. But I think what matters, where you borrow and why you borrow, must be strictly in the interests of your own country. Then you go where you can get the best deal. One of the deals could simply be, as Bill says, could be that maybe these ones won't ask us too many questions. That's also a reason to go, of course. You have many things to do, and you don't want anybody to add conditions to your finance bill. As you go to the public, you won't be able to get away with that with something else. But I think, and finally, let me add this: there's nothing wrong with the borrowing. The problem there is when you are trying to make an argument, we all do. You can commit yourself not to. You can even use words like, we will stop borrowing, or we are not going to borrow more. Those things are not normally correct. And what happens, there is a reduction in relative terms. Again, let's go back to that comparator, relative to how much relative to GDP. But the actual numbers themselves might grow. In the numerator might still grow while you are reducing at a reducing rate, or rather than you have completely stopped it. So I do not see ourselves with still so many balls in the air cutting back substantially on debt. I think we need to have it. It needs to be well targeted, but we need to spend a little more time on cleaning out on the hygiene on the expenditure side. That what goes into the expenditure is truly what needs to be there, at the rate needs to be there, at the time needs to be there. We can't, sort of allow expenditure to grow exponentially, as it were, exaggerating a bit, to grow without too much restraint, and then each time struggle to have to catch up and fund it. I don't think that's not a good thing. Personally, I was quite concerned on these process issues around expenditure. When do projects meet the threshold to get into the pipeline in terms of whatever returns you have looked at? The returns aren't always rates of return. There are other ways you look at, but is it what we need to do? Is it what we must be doing? And so on. So then that way, by the time you go look for money even to borrow, it comes and it's going specifically to areas where you have identified as the areas where you want to put that money. And there should be no doubt about that. I think that we can probably say, in my view, this administration, because of the taxation regime it is put in place, it's forced people to re-look at what things make sense, what things is going to make money. And if people decide, if the investors, private sector, decide that this is not going to make money, they will not be able to invest in it. And government, through its various ways of learning, they will see that this is not working. So they would probably step back a bit and use some clever way of getting around it. No government goes forward when they know that your taxes will fall because the economy is, the growth is declining. Your taxes will fall because you won't be able to collect enough money. They'll always step back and correct it.
All right.
If not, Bill will remind them next time he's on the
Right. Let's say from Anthony. Now, right now, we get to granular with the finance bill.
I think that the challenge that I see is the numbers that that we talk about. The budget, and I look at the numbers, we're talking about raising 3.9 billion. So if you look at the ordinary revenue, it's about neighborhood of 3.2 billion. So we already have a deficit. Yes, granted, there's physical consolidation. There's a bit of reduction in the debt to GDP ratio. But again, even that is contested because we don't know the GDP number you're working with. Sometimes you see 15 trillion.
It's a moving target.
It isn't, but it's referred to as such,
Yes.
but it's not.
It shouldn't be.
But the challenge is that there is a big component there called A in A, appropriation in aid, which is about 450 or 440 billion. Now, what that means, and that is what is coming to the eco levy, that all these sagas will be looking to raise money from the same organizations that are being overtaxed. We have about 400, I think, and 30 sagas. If you look at how much money that is spent by government, because a lot of this money that we're going to raise is actually for the current budget.
Of course.
And you look at how much money do we spend to actually finance these sagas? What comes out of it? One ministry has about 30. And if you go to them, and I don't know how to name it, but there's one that spends hundreds of millions, but recovers 4 million. And you say, what is the business case here? A majority of those, the good thing is that the government is thinking of consolidating all of them. Perhaps not more than 50, or maybe not more than 100. But then the challenge is, you have that budget, you've created a number there, and you tell the finance committee now, raise the money to finance that budget. Even how they come together to say, what is our strategy of raising this money? If you look at the finance bill in general, you don't see a common thread of a strategy. How do we grow this cake? How do we bring more people into the money economy? I think 70% of them, President Museveni was here talking about 68% of Ugandans were outside the money economy. How do we make sure we're having people inside the money economy so that then they can pay the taxation? What you're doing now is to even exclude more. And when it comes to the time of talking about the e-teams, you will see that in the attempt to broaden the base, we're cutting off almost half of the peasant farmers or subsistence farmers from the economic fabric. If you tell them, they are not in business. If you tell my mom, I told my mom, she does a few things that she can, I say, you need to do e-teams. I say, listen, I just eat all of them. Our members.
And even talking about the e-teams, I think one of the punitive measures is the 2 million shillings that you have to pay if you're not onboarding e-teams.
Consequence, that actually is a bit of myopia because even before you go to finding people, you want to figure out how many people you're going to cut off because they're not going to pay. And we've met with KRSA, it's not going to happen. Because these farmers, they say they're not in business. They sell what is in excess. They don't sell because they wake up in the morning that they are doing kilimo biashara. If I have 2 liters of milk and you tell me to register for e-teams, I just sell to the next guy in the kiosk, in a chupa. So if I have 2 pigs and I'm supposed to sell to a guy who goes to sell to farmers' choice, I just eat it. So we are saying unintended consequences of some of these things in terms of strategy is not well thought out. Right now, majority of our members who are in milk-based business, they're doing cheese, they're collecting in Molo, Nakuru. Those farmers have told them, get lost, we're not selling, we don't want anything to do with it. So we have cut off 60% of suppliers are not supplying. Where is this milk? They are drinking excess milk and selling to the kiosks around there. And that is, so avocado, and I was telling them, members of parliament, avocado conversation was just the tip of the iceberg. The problem with the iceberg, the tip is only 10%. Avocado is just less than 10% because they are consolidated, they have a political voice. So there are so many things that we need to look at it from strategy perspective in terms of how do we raise money. There is no common strategy when you look at the whole of that bill. Just picking from this one, what do we do with these ones? Let's just pick 10% for this one. These ones, 3%. These ones, we don't like them, or this one, leave them this time. There's no strategy.
All right. I don't know. If I may, for me, before I get granular, let me just say, I find it interesting that this suit against the finance bill is coming from, a sitting parliamentarian, because I would have thought that, the purview of budgeting and appropriation is within the ambit of parliament, and they would be able to articulate their issues there before it ends up in a court of law. So I wonder sometimes from a process point of view, and maybe Bilo or Sako could tell us where that disconnect comes in, because that might have been an opportunity for him to argue to the floor of the House.
That's exactly the situation.
That's
that
they
are not given, the Senate are not given that opportunity to.
It begs the question, therefore, are they having the debates and the conversations that they need to have internally before it gets out to the public? But having said that, I take note of the fact, first of all, that the National Treasury has reduced the figure from 4.2 trillion to 3.9 trillion, which is about a 300 billion shilling reduction. However, if we look at the way government spends its money, one would have thought that the natural course of action would be that if the balance, move towards a balanced budget, where you are budgeting on resources that you know that you have. But in this case, it appears that we are consistently always budgeting way beyond what our tax capabilities are. And therefore, the tax capability is always being, we're pushing the policies to try and ensure that we have a sufficient taxation to meet these very bloated budgetary requirements. And when we look at it also from an austerity perspective, we don't see from the leadership any signs of economic austerity. Austerity should come as a natural consequence. But today, if you look at the largesse that government, and especially leadership, are manifesting, it doesn't augur very well. It actually almost contradicts the fact that we seem to be facing significant financial challenges. Let me focus a little bit on a granular basis in the capital markets. For us in the capital markets, we have seen some of the propositions that they have come forward with. One of them is, we look at the capital gains tax in the real estate investment trusts as a vehicle, as a pass-through tax, and hence it need not be applied. We're trying to grow our capital markets and become a focal point in sub-Saharan Africa. But if we have taxation like capital gains tax and real estate investment trusts, then the tendency would be to reduce the growth of that sector. We've also seen the 5% taxation proposed for infrastructure bonds, and I said earlier on that we support that because we think that will release more credit to the private sector. The proposition to increase, to levy tax on the interest income on green bonds, in my opinion, is counterproductive, because we are trying to grow this instrument, particularly with the reality now that climate action funding and green bonds are going to be something that we would want to be entrenched deeper because of the significant challenge that we have with climate change in the world. And finally, on the taxation that they're proposing on financial advisory services and brokerage services, I think that's not going to augur well, because, like I said, we are trying to grow this industry, and, the amount of money that you collect, from an already very struggling aspect of the capital market is not going to, at the end of the day, pan out as we expect. Yeah.
And maybe, Bill, just to clarify on the issue of why this should be a matter that is being thrashed out by Omtatah in Parliament, within the chambers and not outside Parliament. I think recently also there was they were calling it the House Bill that was meant to make sure there's consensus between the Senate and the National Assembly so that this fight is actually over and done with. But that also has been shut down.
Yeah, but
if you're privy to it.
Yeah, but even if there was consensus, the issue of Omtatah going to court, I think is predicated on the dynamics in the House. There's the political party tyranny. If you don't have the numbers, whether you raise it or not, it really is irrelevant. You're not going to succeed. So this is what is forcing Omtatah to go to court, because even if he raised it, it will be shot down by because political party, you know what happens around the finance bill. They go for a meeting to State House, and then they come back in 1 hour and it will be passed. That happens to the budget. So he knows that the only way out on this is probably to do that. But I think clearly what I think Corona is saying is that there has to be some discussion, because this is Parliament. You know, there has to be a process. There has to be, you know, this is government, 3 arms of government. But I think Parliament particularly should appreciate that this constitution gave them significant powers in terms of the budget process, and they need to really look at, and they represent. These are the people. These are the guys who represent people out there, and that's why they're there. And I think that's where the weak link in all this, because otherwise, if Parliament really came out strongly on their responsibilities, then clearly we would not be having all this noise in the streets. Everything would be done in a more dignified manner in the in the House.
Yeah. And if you look at the time allowed, even for us to provide memorandum, it's a very complex bill. It's a 137-page bill, very complex. You get 7 days, 10 days to
plow
submit
through that.
Yes. So next week, on Tuesday, is a deadline on 28th. And I can tell you, if you go through that bill, if you're not a tax expert and you don't have a strong legal team, you will not understand anything in that bill.
Yeah.
So that is by design.
That's why people are picking bread.
That is by design. So that it goes way over your head. You don't understand a sorting thing.
It's by its nature.
But where is austerity?
There's that.
No, austerity. Look, I mean, really, I want to take issue with particularly what the government spokesman said last week. Was it this week? When the issue of the jet that the president used to the US, costing, and it's all over international news, you know, costing about $1.5 million. And then he says, look, what's the big deal with the president spending 200 million shillings? He's going to come home with 10 times the amount.
He hadn't just done his homework.
So, I mean, we can't run the nation this way. You must lead by example. You cannot tell Kenyans, pay taxes. Mama Mboga, she pays taxes from her little whatever. And then you guys spending it in that manner, and then you say, you know, what's the big deal? I think we have to see this.
You're so correct. I mean, the reality is where the rubber meets the road. I mean, the commerce at the local level. I mean, if you go to the rural towns today and look at the state of the economy, you'll be amazed. I mean, you'll even drive around at night and hardly see any vehicles moving. I mean, the reality is that there's a very, very big cash crunch. And, you know, the situation that we are in right now, I mean, nobody's talking about even the issue of unpaid debt by government to suppliers, both national government and county governments. If you look at one sector, for example, like the construction sector, I mean, at the end of the Kibaki regime, there was a local class of local contractors that had developed significant capability, both in terms of equipment, in terms of human resource, and in terms of technical expertise. That class has almost been totally wiped out because of inability to make ends meet because of unpaid bills.
Yeah.
And, you know, I find it really, really strange that actually nobody ever even talks about that anymore. I don't know what's happening at Kenya Association of Manufacturers.
I mean, it's the same story. You remember the supplies of medicine to KEMSA by local manufacturers of pharma. It's the same case. So you go round and round in circles. It's going to get to a point where counties will never get anybody to supply them in a credible business. National government will not get to a point where a credible business want to do business with them. Today, if you get a business, when it's $1 billion shillings, would you supply to government?
But Treasury has indicated that at least with the task force, at least the 150 billion shillings have been paid off.
No.
It's not true.
The audit was approved.
The audit was approved.
Yeah,
it was the audit.
not the payment.
Not the payment. Yeah, you're right. It was the audit that was approved. Yes.
And as consequences, you go to the hospitals. So despite all the taxes, but there are no medicine.
I want to challenge the business membership organizations, the CAPSAs, CAMS, and the Chambers of Commerce. I think we need to do also a survey to see what value the government pays for goods and services, because I think it's significantly, because of the delayed payment situation and the fact that there's also a lot of rent-seeking opportunity where you need to get your money out. I'm very sure that the cost of a biro to the government probably could be 10 times what it is in a store because of the challenges that you would get. I just want to focus a little bit on the debt issue, Debal. You know, at some point I remember there were some parliamentarians who were proposing bills to cap the debt. And I think the latest was by the member from somewhere in Nandi, Alex Koskei, who proposed to put in a bill to cap the national debt.
Bujasi Sako was here as well.
Bujasi Sako, I think, also endeavored to do the same. Why do these bills never see the light of day? I mean, we would not be having this conversation if we had dealt with this problem ab initio.
Because there's a lack of continuity, especially with the legislations. When you have a new parliament, they come up with new bills. Even if they sound the same, like Bunyasi Sako as well, someone will just pick it up, tweak it, then becomes their bill. There's no continuity. And this is a question you've been raising also with Bill Okero. Why some of his...
Was that because of, in your case, was it because of...
The time it took, I began October 2020 and couldn't finish by...
2020.
By the end of Parliament in 2022.
2 years down the road. So
2022, it has been trashed.
Prioritized.
What were you proposing?
I was proposing a series of tightening on what goes into the expenditure program, how it's vetted, by whom. And first of all, you just start with the database. There's a big issue on what numbers are what. Then you try and tighten on the process issues, so that only a few high priority activities, well, probably fewer than we have got, would enter the fray. And that already puts you in a relatively stronger position to begin looking for money to finance it. Because as it is, the decisions to grow the expenditure pipeline are completely removed from decisions from ability to finance that expenditure pipeline. They come from different directions. And also the same treasury that puts up the expenditure, the one that's is supposed to come in and bring in the revenue. So what they will do? They will exaggerate what they can do on the revenue side.
To justify.
To justify, because they're now targeting to finance this. And they wanted to get a measure of separation in decision making as to expenditure levels perhaps being related to the long-term macroeconomic framework. What is it we can actually sustain as an economy? Forget finance it. How can we sustain that level of expenditure in the things you want to do in the time you want to do and so on. So those were some of the, and then there are a few sophisticated things you could say, a bit more in terms of how Treasury deals that they look at. But every government, let me tell you, the people who are not in government at that time supported the bill. I had a chat with the president himself, President Uhuru, in a very good social setting where we had 3 hours by the time we were done. And he was focusing on the fact that, Bunyasi, you think you'll have a country which does not borrow? You want to cut out borrowing? That kind of, he looks at it as naivety, almost I could say. He didn't use the words. But then I would kindly push back and say, as you know. Now, as you know, it means you, Mr. President, is fully aware that you can't borrow your way to prosperity. Yes, it has to be something sustainable. You can get faster rates of growth with a lower expenditure, with better quality outcomes in terms of the impacts on the people. So it's not, if you seek to, and you see he was in the infrastructure mode. So anything that we discuss how to manage that was a problem. The association of manufacturers then were also complaining about partly because most of the money now was going into big infrastructure, big ticket items. Not that you should not do big infrastructure, but it's a trade-off. So it's that trade-off that wasn't apparent as what to do.
Right, the Association of Manufacturers as well are raising hesitations on a number of levies that I want us to just get granular with. The proposal by the bill to improve the Export Investment Promotion Levy and the Miscellaneous Fees and Levies Act on raw materials used for manufacturers' value addition. You also say this will be detrimental to the competitiveness of local industries. Introduction of eco-levy on selected goods manufactured in Kenya or imported into Kenya, also that you're taking issues with. The proposal to increase the import declaration fund, the 2.5% to 3%, also that will have a negative impact as well. And you can highlight on these three before we delve deeper into others as well.
Let me first make it, from the first principles where we operate in.
Yes.
We operate in EAC common market. We have a common tariff book within EAC, right? We operate within COMESA. We are now going into AFCFTA. With that in mind, there is a philosophy about taxation on how that is done within EAC, within COMESA. Now, any imposition of taxes on raw materials in Kenya, those are called domestic taxes. They only impact Kenyan companies, Kenyan products. Remember, we are competing with others. Very soon, South Africa will be bringing steel into this market because you have opened the African market, right? We create bottlenecks for the value manufacturers here to import intermediate raw materials to manufacture. What will happen? They go via Tanzania. What will stop them to build their Tanzania base bigger than ours? So what we are saying is that from the word go, let us encourage production by not putting excise levies, fees on raw materials. Allow us to add value and then put those levies in the finished goods. But regardless of where you put them, at least we'll be competitive. This tax is not to companies, it's not to products. It is to Wanjiku. Anything that you put will ultimately go to the consumer. But we worry about the demand. We worry about being competitive relative to our neighbors. That is our argument. Do not put levies, intermediate levies on raw materials. And if you must do, then there's a guiding philosophy and tariff book that is adopted by the 7 countries within EAC. Anything else that you put is going just to make us uncompetitive. You can buy cement from Egypt and bring it here. We are now buying packaging paper from Egypt. And this is a problem. If you do glass here, if you build your company manufacture glass, you have excise and all these duties. But if you buy a jar in a glass jar, it lands from Egypt duty-free because you're in COMESA. So the policy makers or the technical people who are working on these specific proposals, I don't think they are aware of the environment we work in. And I think that is what, and we've given, it's not because of lack of information, we have given specific proposals, even how government can increase how much they collect. Right? And those proposals, and we did very well, we did with the industry, the Pere Ministry, we worked together to National Treasury. We saw the first bill that came out as a secret bill. And all those things included. For instance, if you're charging somebody 16% VAT on machinery, and you're investing R1 billion, that is 160 million shillings VAT. They'll say it will be coming back. You're never going to get that money. All right? Now, if Uganda gives you a concession that you do not need to pay VAT on machinery, but you have here an extra 160 million for your working capital, and you can still access Kenyan market duty-free, because with the common market, where would you invest? These are some of the things that we think are basic economics, and I think we should have been seeing them in this bill. And this bill that we're saying, we haven't seen the strategy to grow the economy, to grow the cake, so that then you can get more money. It is actually continuously, there's a bill here called eco-levy, and you can see that NEMA is looking at raising 50 billion from eco-levy. We have invested and we've worked with the government to come up with what is called extended producer responsibility. We incubated producer responsibility organization, PACPRO, KEPRO. Manufacturers are paying so that they can take care of the waste generated through the process. When they are doing that, you bring another levy called eco-levy, which is 100% increase Again, the double taxation. This is where we're saying it's a big problem.
Well, I wanted just to also you to indicate, because we expected that when we look at the economic survey, and also we have Chair who has also raised that particular issue, that there has been a blip, there has been a growth, 2% from the manufacturing sector. I thought that will have really flown in the face in light of what we're seeing with the 77% decrease on the clinker. 100% you say also, was it at a percent of the cement? Completely, and shutting down. So is that a true reflection? And we know over the years, over the decade, that the manufacturing sector has been plateauing, and there has been concern. So we are injecting 2% to the GDP.
No. I think those numbers. No, it's not the same, because we talk about contribution of manufacturing to GDP. Which is now at 7.8. We're waiting for the number now. That has not been computed. What you're talking about
7.8. Okay, what I'm
is
talking
manufacturing alone. What was a growth, not in relative to GDP contribution, but manufacturing growth itself.
All right. So we have some of the publications that were indicating it wrongly.
No. I think it's just the interpretation.
The interpretation. Okay,
they're right. But again, you need to look at them in the context. It's not the contribution to GDP, because contribution to GDP, you look at financial services, you look at retail, wholesale, and how manufacturing also is plugging in.
Yes.
This is manufacturing alone in a box. Did it grow? It grew by 2%. That's marginal. We are supposed to be growing 3x, because we have a dream to do 20% by 2030 in the next 7 years, right? Now, if you look at that growth you see there's also organic growth. There's organic growth because the population is also, consumption is rising.
Yeah.
So this could be organic. There is nothing that we have done in fact. And that's why KRA is missing that. And we went and say, you're missing that $1 billion a month. And we can show you where the decline is. Go and look at these sectors, 3 sectors. And all of them, everything, red. So the growth is marginal.
It's marginal.
Marginal.
Kiprono, I wonder what you will have to say regarding the eco-levy, and in the spirit of, greening the environment, green initiatives, some of those financial instruments also that are attractive within the Nairobi Security Exchange. This particular levy sounds a bit punitive when you're really trying to shake into place, the climate change action.
I wouldn't want to talk about something that I haven't really, a full grasp of. I mean, I haven't looked at the equal level.
That is just highlighted here.
I've listened to the arguments by my colleague, and it's certainly, I think anything that reduces the competitiveness of our own industry needs to be considered very, very seriously. And I think, for example, like the green bonds, I talked about the green bonds earlier on, and the fact that the government proposes to levy a tax on the interest on green bonds. And I think that anything that can be done for us to access more climate action funds and to make the world more sustainable, I am in support of. But then I think from a more specific perspective, I would go associate myself with the opinions of the manufacturers here, in the sense that we also need to look at the competitiveness of our own industry, because our own industry also is what we are looking at as a bedrock to create employment, and also to meet the tax obligations that our government so desperately needs.
Let me illustrate this issue of the eco levy a bit as an example, using our example of our industry. And I think the point he said is that there's already levies. They already, people already paying manufacturers. That's why even when you are packaging using a plastic, it's indicated you're the one which manufacturer, so that ultimately if that paper is found somewhere, you're the one who's responsible. You've seen it. Even as they deliver these things to you, they would have to find a way of picking it back again. I mean, these things have been very well laid out. So it's not really about the environment. It's about an alternative way of just raising revenue for government. That's what the government is looking for. And I'll give you an example of my industry. 120-liter jerrycan, which is used for an essential food like cooking oil. Right now, manufacturers are charging us 230 shillings, 240 shillings. Then you have charged an eco levy, introduced an eco levy of 150 on that, because that jerrycan is 1 kilo. Its cost is 230. You're adding 150, that's almost 80% of its costs as a tax. Then on top of that, you add them together, it comes to over 380. You add again 10% excess duty on the same finance bill, another 10% excess duty. Then you are going to add again the VAT on it. I mean, so something that would have cost, Kenyans only 100, 200, less than 200 shillings, we're going to end up paying 400, 500 shillings. And that's going to end up in the cost of the product that goes out to the consumer. So really, the end of the day, it's not about the environment. Most of these levies are not used for the purposes for which they're intended. And I've said this many times, even here. And the best example is the railway development levy. Find out how much the 30, 40 billion being collected annually has been from 2016. So they have cleared that SGR thing a long time ago. Look at our sector, food, cooking oil. They have this 2% nuts and oil crops development levy. 2%, huge amount. That runs into billions. Is it being used to support farmers to grow oil crops? No, it just goes into the consolidated fund. So there's so many, hundreds of this levy. What happens is that the government is creating levies to avoid saying, up in the VAT to from 18 to. Yeah. This is the excuse.
I just wanted to add one more example.
Okay, sure.
About the coal. So coal is used as fuel for cement manufacturers. In the international markets, coal per ton is around $52. Now the levy that has come is 27,000 shillings per ton. If you do that in dollars, is 207. So coal is $50.
Yeah.
The clinker is $50. What is supposed to process that coal is $200 per ton. So what you've done, these cement companies are going to shut down. You're going maybe to left one or two. Wipe them out completely. Wipe out, if you do the calculation for your excise from crude palm oil.
Or you're shutting down 13 factories. There's no doubt. The moment that bill is signed, you're shutting them down.
If you look at the specific tax, eco levy that you mentioned a few minutes ago, it was applied in Ghana. I don't know what the experience has been in Ghana, because we need to see that. And I also note that it is targeted mainly at the cellular phone industry, mobile phone industry, and at diapers as well. Maybe an alternative would be to provide for the government to look at providing incentives for the circular economy. But I think that's one aspect that hasn't really been very seriously looked at. I don't know whether within the Kenya Association of Manufacturers.
We have PROs.
We have companies that are actively involved in the circular economy.
Infrastructure is set.
Very well.
In fact, we are only ones in Africa.
Yes.
And South Africa a bit. All the other African countries are coming to learn from us.
Yes.
And it was our own initiative, because you cannot do away with plastics. But we said there is a way to deal with that. So batteries for vehicles, we have, So this is something that is working. You're breaking something that is working, or you're fixing something that is working.
Yeah. And the Americans say if it's not broken,
it's not.
Don't fix
it. And don't break what's fixed.
The principle generally, when you get something like imposing an eco tax in a system in which there's perhaps self-regulation already, companies are dealing with it, is I think to provide a specific disincentive or cost to the polluter to sort of suffer, as it were. You have to try and bring it down so that the polluter can feel the pain a bit, because there's always, in the self-regulated systems, making judgments on the basis of impacts, for example, quality impacts or health impacts, whatever the impacts might be. If you go into our Mukurus here in town, you will see the real impacts of these plastics. You're not going to see them in the Westlands or not even perhaps in CBD, but Mukuru, Kwaruben, Kwanjenga, and so on. In these lower valley areas, and particularly in rainfall times like this one, you will see the real impacts on society. So you might find then that perhaps the steps that are already in place are not fully working. But is the money going to the purposes for which it's claimed to go to? And this is a valid point that all my colleagues are making around the table. We raise all this money. You raise the rail development levy, tourism, levy, tourism something development levy. We have paid that for very many years. And you go back actually to say to what extent is the money ending up fixing what you wanted to fix, and you don't find it becomes part of the general pool. That's a real problem there. So maybe government should go back a bit also and look at these targeted levies that they do, and how much of it is actually helping fix the ultimate problem, and not just becoming a general revenue source.
But let me put a twist on this conversation as well. I know that this levy will be paid to NEMA. If you look at the impunity with which especially the built environment, the impunity that's going on in Nairobi, particularly with the Chinese contractors. If you go to Kilimani, Lavington area and see what they are doing, and I don't think that NEMA and the Nairobi County government planning would be blameless in this conversation. I mean, if I do sincerely hope that if this organization is going to be in any additional revenue situation, that for heaven's sake that they do something to stop that impunity. I don't know how the environmental impact assessment for all these crazy developments that are taking place in Nairobi are going through, and it's the same agency. So today, if they collect 50 billion shillings from an eco-tax, is that going to save us from what we are seeing in this city of ours in Nairobi?
In fact, you are living to fix bad behaviors.
Yes.
Because collection of garbage and disposal. So we manufacture, consumers use. There are people contracted by the counties to collect garbage. What do? Dump in the river, dump in the residential areas, dump in the informal settlements. We are dealing with now Nairobi River. It's not because of floods. We are not in the situation we are in because of enhanced rain, El Nino. It's just because of blocking of the river by garbage collectors who are paid. But because there is no enforcement, you go back to the same people who paid, extended producer responsibility. Now we want another levy. I mean, and even this one will still not fix the problem. So we have a fundamental problem of the agencies delivering the services they were created for. I mean, I was in Madara area 4 long before it rained, and we're opening that bridge so that water can pass with our extended producer responsibility organization. And you're saying, NEMA, please come and see. County, come and see. It's going to rain soon. I was in area 4 for the whole day trying to open that, the bridge. The trucks are driving on the top of the river because the garbage has been dumped there for many years.
So, dialogue is necessary on the real sector issues before we get to the financing.
Indeed. All right, the music is up, indicating that I should take a short break, 8 o'clock on the nose. It's time for us also to just slake our thirst a bit. Then when we circle back, we shall also hear what the president had to say regarding the edible oils and what is the way forward. And also, are you aware that your housing levy, there is an indication that it might be also in being invested in the infrastructure bonds. Right now that we know also there is a 5% levy that will be from the infrastructure bonds. What does that really portend? And will I get a share of the investments or the interest that will have accrued from there as well? We take a short break. You're watching Sokoni.